Hello, friends of the Museum of South Texas History. My name is Francisco Guajardo. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the museum. And November 2023 Museum Plática is going to be an exciting and I think a very innovative and hopefully very provocative Plática. Because we have a guest today who is a rising star in the field of culinary arts and a philosopher as well. Her name is Nadia Casaperalta, and so we will be having a conversation with Nadia around holiday foods, around origins of, around how we can predict maybe, how food may be going into the future. She is a chef, and she's also a professor of culinary arts at South Texas College in McAllen, although I'm not sure if she teaches in other places outside of McAllen. We'll find out some of that. I think the extraordinary thing about this, at least to me, is to find out what the motivation, what the inspiration is for somebody like Nadia, who's a very talented professional. So when we come back, we will find out a little bit about Nadia's biography, and then we'll explore some of what the biography has to do with who she is as a chef and as an artist as well. So stay with us for this Museum Plática in November of 2023.
Under the executive order of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, all persons can sell their gold below market value to the government.
Enterré oro bajo de la casa. Úsalo para cuidar a tu hermano.
I found gold.
That's my gold.
That's my father's gold.
The jury finds the true owner to be...
It's a story filled with mystery, intrigue, and one's birthright. Dr. Garcia's gold exhibit is on display at the Museum of South Texas History. Go to mosthistory.org for more information.
Welcome back to Museum Pláticas, friends of the museum. And so I have with me today Nadia Casaperalta. So Nadia, welcome to the museum, first of all.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I asked you just a second ago if you had been to the museum before.
Mm-hmm.
And so you said that you had. I wonder what the occasion was for your visit.
It was when what did we do? It was a voting one. And I had to get a little chip and then see if I qualified to vote. And no, I didn't. I didn't. I was in a lot of the tokens that you had to put. I did not qualify to vote.
So that must have been.
It was like a 1921 exhibit or something.
Yeah, it was like a women's suffrage kind of thing, and you happened to go there. So you must have come with maybe Marisa or somebody, or.
Probably, yeah.
Probably.
And then there was also like a little bit of dinosaurs in this corner exhibit. It was a while back.
Yeah, we have, in a corner exhibit. So upstairs we have a mosasaur, and then we have a mammoth, a Colombian mammoth. And so, there were mammoths here. And we have fossil remains of mammoths who roamed this part of the world 15,000 years ago. There's a story of a caliche pit that was dug in La Jolla back in 1964. And as they dug like 30 feet down, they found like a bunch of remains, fossil remains of mammoths. How about that? Like a burial ground.
Jesus.
It's crazy.
And they probably ate them too.
Yeah, well, predators would have eaten it because the first evidence of humans here is about 10,000 years ago.
Oh.
And we don't know that mammoths were still around 10,000 years ago. They probably died like 15,000 years ago. Okay, so you, Nadia, are a chef. Yes. Can you tell me and the audience how it is that Nadia Casaperalta comes to be a chef when Nadia, graduating from high school, went off to study anthropology and sociology and religion and those kinds of things?
Yes.
And then you come to become a chef. How did that happen?
I know, mother's biggest disappointment. Well, I didn't choose it. I think it chose me because that's just how it happened. I've always been around food, even since I was a little girl in Mexico in our farm. Well, not our farm, but the family farm that we grew up in. The kids would just go out and play and eat. We would find moras or tunas, or that's how we passed the time, right? Just playing outside, getting into trouble, and punching agaves for their aguamiel, because that was the Gatorade of the time, right? And so high school happened in the United States, and my first job was at McDonald's, because as an immigrant kid, te pones a trabajar, right?
So you were what, like?
I was 16,
16
yeah,
years
16,
old.
yeah.
Growing up in
Elsa.
In Elsa.
And my first job was McDonald's. And of course, I am not the girl that wants to be taking the orders. I want to be in the action. So I was the first girl to work the back, because
really?
they didn't allow that, because you could get hurt, you could get burned. And so I proved them wrong, and I got my first 10-cent raise from $5.15 to $5.25.
Was this something that you pushed management because they? I guess it wasn't a practice, and you said, "Hey, I want to do this."
Yeah, I was like, "Hey, I can do the burgers," and they were like, "No, that's for the guys, because they have to clean the grills." I was like, "But I can clean them too, and look, let me show you." And so, all it takes is them being short-staffed one day, and they're like, "All right, get in there," right? And so that's how it happened. Then I moved to college, and in college, I worked at a Middle Eastern restaurant in Michigan. I went to college in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend of mine got me a server position at a Middle Eastern restaurant. And I was so mesmerized by the chef marinating the shawarma, which is like a fajita, right? We'll go there later. And he was putting pomegranate molasses and spices. So I was in the corner watching him, and I had my little server notepad, and I was like, a ver, ajo, pomegranate molasses. And when I turned around, he's right here, grabs my notepad, rips the paper out, and goes, "No." And I was like, "What?"
And you're 18, 19 years
Yeah,
old?
I'm 19. And I was like, I'm so sorry. He starts yelling at me. I'm like, I want to learn. Like, it's so cool. And he goes, no women in the kitchen. I was like, but, I can do it. I can. So, again, it takes just one day of short staff. He puts me on the salads. So I'm cutting parsley still, right? Like nothing glamorous yet. Cutting parsley, peeling all the potatoes, taking all the garlics out of the bulbs for the sauces. I don't get to touch any of the food, but I get to see the display of what would be my first international cuisine experience, and understanding how ingredients really, travel from place to place in one recipe, right? So like the shawarma, it's marinated beef, just like fajitas, marinated, right? Different spices. The pita is the thick tortilla. The hummus, I'm like, this is refried beans, right? So then they started calling me the brown from the other town. Because of course I can also eat, I know how to roll up my shawarma and eat it. And so that was the first time I say that I worked in a professional kitchen, was there at Zuruna.
You describe it as your first international, like, food experience, maybe. Is there a distinction between the international and what Mexico and the U.S. would be?
Yeah. I would say you're right. My first international experience would have probably been the box of churches that my mom fed us every Wednesday, right? Coming from guisados, and my mother would prepare in Mexico. She would prepare these beautiful juices. Now they're beautiful, but when I was 5 years old, they were not beautiful, right? Betabel, beets, carrots, celery, and we hated that, right? As kids, we were like, no, mommy, no, jugo, no. And moving to the U.S., it was
So,
cereal.
and where was this in Mexico?
This was in Durango, Mexico.
Where you were born?
I was born.
And raised.
Yes.
And you came when you were, what, like 7 years old or so?
8 years old, yeah.
You were 8 years old.
Going on 9.
Yeah. Now, there's an interesting story here about how does the circus play a role in your life, or was that like your sister's story?
That was definitely my sister's story.
Your
yeah,
sister's
she got the fun. The fun.
How she was
childhood.
born in the circus.
Yeah, there's a really cool picture of her, just like sitting on top of an elephant, like just hanging out. That was her.
As a 2-year-old.
Yeah, like 5 years old. She's just sitting in an elephant, on top of an elephant. And then the backstage of, what her life would be with all the clowns. A very famous clown, Cepillín, was just like holding her, and all the circus staff is like celebrating her 5th year birthday anniversary. Yeah, Capulina's like her padrino or something. I know.
Really?
I know.
Yeah.
I get the tunas. She gets Capulina for
Okay.
for padrino. But I'm the
oh.
funny one, so.
Okay. Well, your sister's kind of funny, no? Maybe in her
funny
own
looking.
in
No,
her
I'm
own
just
way.
kidding. Yeah.
I don't know if she's watching, but okay. A shout out to the. When you talk about food when you're a child and you said, but now it's like, wow. Right? So get into that. What is that kind of a function of being a child? Or
Yes, I think we have a lot of, biases in our food intake. And
this
a
is
lot of them,
universal?
a universal take, yeah. And a lot of them stem, every time now that I teach, I ask my students, the day one, say, what's one food that you absolutely hate? And then I give them a free therapy session. I go, okay, let's talk about why you hate onions. Take me to the place of the first time you had an onion. Who gave it to you? What room were you in? Where were you? And immediately it's like trauma. It's like ERM or EDM, the recalling of the memories. They're like, oh, it's my dad. It was my dad. He made me eat an onion with a taco and I hated it. And it made me feel like I was loved. I'm like, there it is. There it is. And that's why we don't like onions now, right?
So they taught you this in culinary art school, or
No,
is this
they
just a
didn't.
gift?
No, this was just from probably my therapy sessions. No, it's because it's linked to memory. For sure, food, it touches all the senses. It's not just... it's in the brain. The flavor acknowledgement is in the brain. We think it's the mouth, but it's not. It's the minute you get that flavor sensation, you're transported to that setting of where you recall it, right? And so when we're talking about holiday foods, that is the essence of any holiday recipe, is why does it matter to you? Why are tamales your favorite on Christmas? Whose tamales are your favorites? Where were you? And then you can source that memory back. And then people will tell you their story. Like it was my grandma's, like chile rojo. Every time I knew the house would get so warm, right? And you recall everything. So it starts from sometimes childhood, right? Sometimes adolescence, but we really tap into it in our adult palate, right? Where we're now longing for it almost, or we don't, we reject it, right? We're like, I do not like menudo. I remember my mom would turn on the heat and smell and that's why I don't eat it, right? So
there seems to be, by your description, a strong connection between food and story. Who is the culinary artist that is the best storyteller out there?
what? I don't know. Probably all the mothers and grandmothers and tias and tios, because sometimes it's the tios, right? Out there, yeah.
You didn't go to the big names.
No,
You didn't want to go there.
yeah, the big names are tough, you know. They're the big names will we won't explore outside of, you know, the boxing of our food. Everybody wants like, what chef is the best at this? What chef is the best at this, right? For me, I want to find the story of why the recipe looks the way it does, right? And that's where, for me, the fun is. Like, wait, what do you mean you had venado tamales? It's not like, oh, wow, that's a culinary, like, what a culinary discovery. No. It's who didn't have pork and who brought venado that was like, hey, you know what, just put it in there. And now it's a this, like, even trendy, like, non-traditional, you know, tamales. But it was somebody's story. And how did that happen? That's for me, I think, the beauty in a recipe. It's not even sometimes how delicious it is. It's the story behind the recipe. That's, for me, the most thrilling.
So, tell us the story of your grandmother, who lives in Durango and who has been 80 years old for a while, right?
82.
82 for a while. There's got to be a story there between your grandmother, food preparation, and inspiration for you and who you are.
Yeah. Well, there's a real specific story that I think encompasses where I am today, and something that is also a lesson that is passed down through her to me, that I now pass down to my students, right? And that is the story of one dish that she made me, and only me. I'm 8 years old. I get home from school, and I'm eating figs from her fig tree. She had a beautiful higuera. I'm like, I've always been a good eater, so I'm eating them. She goes, deja ahí, tengo la cena preparada. I'm like, ooh, yeah, dinner's ready, let's go. So we sit down, and in front of me, she puts this beautiful consommé. And a consommé is very clear soup. It had a little bit of a very tender white-looking meat. And then it had these little pieces of rice that were butterflied like this, right? So the rice opened up. And tiny pieces of carrot, just very tiny, not a lot. The showcase was definitely the meat, right? And so I eat that, and I'm like blown away. And I'm like, oh my God, abuela, what is this? And she just looks at me and says, tu conejo. And I'm like, Kobe? Oh my God, right? And so I'm like, I start crying. I cry over the bowl for 3 hours, right? And this is according to my sister. It took like 3 hours. And I had an ethical decision because it was so good and I wanted to finish eating it. But I knew that it was wrong. I knew in my heart. I chose that was the wrong thing to do because it was my rabbit, my pet. So I didn't eat it. I didn't finish it. And so that lesson was the connection from the land, right? That to her, this was not a pet. This was a source of food. Se come, ya está listo. He's plump, he's ready to go.
But she also knew that it was your pet.
But she also knew that it was my pet.
Mm-hmm. So she had a moral decision to make herself, probably.
Right. And one thing I didn't mention about Fermina, my grandmother, is that she's also a shaman. She's a curandera. And so that also plays into the story because, you know, as a curandera, you do different types of work. And so maybe that was also a kind of test, if you will, of like what kind of energy worker am I, right? Like, so I don't know. And we've definitely explored that with other scholars too, because the technique that she used, it took me in 2014 when I was finishing culinary school, that technique that she used, the very clear consommé, is actually a French technique. And so I was like, how did Fermina know this French technique? It's very complicated, actually. And then the way she the way she cut the carrots, again, another French technique called brunoise, right? So I'm like, how did Fermina, the lady who doesn't have electricity to this day, because she doesn't want to.
In rural Durango.
No, in the city, she's like, I reject modernity. And I'm like, oh my God, we can afford it. So how did she get these techniques? And so I did talk to some scholars, and they said, you know, in the 1900s, this was trendy. Clarifying consommes was a trend. And if she did any kind of work, especially food work, right, as a lot of Mexican women do, I myself do now, right? My mother did. My mother sold menudo and tamales. You did what the trend was, right? If the señora de la casa wants a clarified consomme, you're going to figure it out how to do it. Similar to me, right? If the people want vegan food, I'm going to do it, right? So that's what they said it to. And so not only yes, she had a decision to say, I'm going to feed your pet rabbit, but I'm going to honor it and prepare it in a very beautiful way to give to you.
Well, you know, you and I were talking about the gold exhibit that we have. Mm-hmm. Dr. Jose Garcia, who was born in Camargo, went to medical school in Mexico City in French. So textbooks were in French, professors were French. And so there's this context here in late 19th century, early 20th century Mexico that Porfirio Diaz was a lover of all things French. Mm. So he imported French institutions. He sent his científicos, to the Sorbonne to study and then come back with French and Euro knowledge to help modernize Mexico.
Yeah.
So that the French influence he brought the Jockey Club, he brought like in culinary influences into Mexico, where not only Porfirio Diaz
The bolillo.
the bolillo.
Bolillo.
Yeah, I mean there was also an invasion, right, of
You're
the
right.
French. So,
Yeah.
so all of that. And so it's not surprising to me that Fermina would have had access to something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay,
I know scholars are so cool. This is why I love museums. I'm like, I know what to do with the chiles, but you guys know when, like, we found them, right? So it's very, very cool.
I mean, there's context. There's fascinating context. So you came from Durango with your mother and your sister when you were 8 years old. You come into the Delta area. You land in Elsa.
The best.
Grew up in Elsa. You went to Ed Cauchosa schools. You graduated from Ed Cauchosa High School like in 2005 or so.
6.
Six, okay. Then you go to Kalamazoo. You graduate from Kalamazoo College with a degree in anthropology and maybe sociology.
Correct. Yeah.
And then what do you do after that? Because you don't go into the food industry, or do you?
No. I've always been in the food industry. Never saw it as a profession. Right? Never saw it as, I'm not gonna cook for a living. That's what my mom did. That's what my grandmother did. I'm not gonna do that. I have a degree now, right? Even though I was studying food identity in anthropology, right? Understanding how we come to be a people. And one of the driving, for me, not just because I'm a chef, I think the most important identity driver in society or in a culture is food. So perfect marriage of my degree and my passion, right? And so after college, it was 2010, so the economy was not very good. So I stayed working in restaurants until, I landed that program director job or got into any organization that would take an anthropology, sociology degree. And I stayed working in food. And it turns out I was getting very good at it. And again, not thinking it was a profession. Very good at it. I could get any job just based on my work ethic. But I was not moving up the ranks. And I didn't know there was a structure. So I applied to a culinary school at the CIA, which is the Culinary Institute of America in San Antonio. I was living in San Antonio at the time. And I said, if I get in, that's fine. If I get a scholarship, that's worth it, because I don't want any more debt, I'll go. Sure enough, got a nice scholarship. And then I wrote to McCormick and told them I'm an upcoming female Latina chef, all the buzzwords, right? And they matched it. So McCormick, thank you. I still buy your spices. Matched the scholarship, and I went to culinary school and started understanding the science behind, the biology behind food preparation, and also the history. Mind you, it was a very French curriculum. So a lot of the stuff was in French. A lot of techniques are in French, but that is the formal training you get. So I graduated from there and started working in a lot of restaurants as a head chef, not head chef, like a sous chef, as a lead chef. And that's kind of where this career took me. Yeah.
I remember visiting you when you were a sous chef in San Antonio, like maybe not 10 years, maybe 10 years ago.
Possibly, yeah.
When they told me, oh, Nadia's working at this restaurant. So Yvonne and I went to look for you.
Yeah.
And you came up. You were there. Yeah.
Yeah. Was it the experimental Asian restaurant?
Is there another one you worked at?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Some
I don't
there was
remember which
so
one it was,
many,
but it was good.
Yeah.
It was good. So this is what we're going to do, Nadia. We're going to take a break.
Sure.
And when we come back, we're going to dive right into holiday foods that are very fronterizo foods.
Let's do it.
All right?
Yeah.
Good. So this is terrific. All right. So stay with us. We'll be back in about a minute.
And lifelong learning to a special family member or friend this year. A Friendship to Most History offers access to the museum free of charge, notices of upcoming programs, quarterly editions of Borderlines, and a discount on most purchases in the museum store. Give a meaningful gift this year. Happy holidays!
Okay, welcome back to Museum Pláticas with Nadia Casaperalta. So, Nadia, what about the tamales y los buñuelos and like all of the fanfare around holiday food? I mean, especially like, Christmas and New Year's and that sort of thing. First, kind of like a take on all of that from your perspective, and potentially maybe like a cultural kind of take on it, maybe a historical take, and then I got some questions for you.
Sure.
So set it up first.
Holiday food. I have one word to describe it. Ritual. That's it. It is a ritual that we love. Every culture has their own holiday ritual. So I think the beautiful part of holiday food is in partaking in it, right? Partaking in ritual. When that doesn't happen, that's when we lose it. It doesn't matter how we do it, right? It doesn't matter in what form the tamal takes, as long as it's not from a can. Because there's a little viral TikTok thing going on, right? As long as we partake in it, it'll be ours in whatever way it looks like, right? And I'm excited every single time that I bring up holiday food. The memories and the stories that people flood with. Even the gentleman at the front desk of the museum, he goes, so what are you here to talk about? And I was like, food. He goes, oh, that's my favorite subject. And I was like, that's everybody's favorite subject. That's why I made it my career, right?
Well, by the way, that would be Ociel. Not sure if Ociel is on, but...
Is it Ociel?
Ociel.
Okay. And then he goes, yeah, immediately, it's clockwork. He goes, pozole, and he goes, and with a beer. And I was like, yeah, can't forget the libations, right? So that is my favorite part of the ritual, is in seeing how people participate in it and execute it, and the stories that are behind that. Yeah. So I'm excited to see what comes up in the chat and the viewers about their favorite holiday foods, because everybody's got specific ones, right? And I would ask to tell us what those are, because again, that's the fun part for me, right? Why are tamales so special to you? Why is the ponche so special to you? Why are the buñuelos your go-to on this holiday season?
So there seems to be like this way of thinking, as I'm understanding it from you, that so much of this is about the person. It is about the self. It is about the participant. It is about the agency that one has with maybe the preparation or with the consumption of the food.
Right.
Right. So culture being boiled down to the self. So is that a philosophy? Is this something that kind of guides your work?
I like to say so, but I think that's the way it's been passed down to me, right? I don't think that with food, sometimes we want to stay so authentic that we lose sight of the growth of the self, right? We lose sight of, for example, hot take veganism, right? I can no longer have tamales because they have lard, they have meat. So now I am not a part of this tradition, of this identity, right? And now I'm kind of on the outside of it. But if we grow and say, well, now there's impossible meat and now there's coconut oil or there's Crisco, now you can be part of it again, right? So I think the self is very important, which is why I am so focused on how do you contribute to your family's recipes or to the stories that are being had around the table, when even if your grandma doesn't let you touch the tamales, right? Because that's happened to me, even though I have the credentials. I dare not say, necesita más sal. No. I just say, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
That's because that is so particular to that person. So yeah, I think the self is very important.
Can we get into the tamal a little bit? Like, the tamal seems to be like ubiquitous, in the valley. It's everywhere, and just about everybody has tamales.
Yeah.
For Christmas. So what's the story with that? Y también qué es el tamal? Talk about like the whole, ethic of the tamal, even because there's an ethic even.
There's ethics, there's rules, and I am by no, even with the chef coat on, I am not an expert on anything except eating. I would step on that. But tamales are, one of those things that you can be wrong by saying, by describing it to the right person, right? And you can be right by describing it to another person. So what it is, it's a corn husk, right? We have the hoja of the corn that's been dehydrated. So again, sustainable. And then it is masa, not just any masa. It has to be white masa or yellow masa. And then it's mixed with a fat. So it could be lard, olive oil, coconut oil, lo que tú quieras. And then usually it has a filling. So traditionally it's puerco rojo. Some may argue it's chicken. Some may argue it's beans. Other people may argue it's jalapenos and cheese and cream cheese, right? And it is wrapped around the corn husk, boiled to perfection, steamed to perfection, sorry. Steamed. And then enjoyed. Or crisped up and then enjoyed.
It's become such an industry as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Year-round tamales.
Year-round tamales.
Yeah.
You said that your mother makes tamales?
My mother makes tamales. And then here's another thing. You ready? She makes the best tamales.
Really?
Yeah. Fight me. Anyone. No, I'm just kidding. I love that because people say, no, my grandma's tamales are the best. No, my dad's tamales.
So does your mother make tamales by herself, or does she bring people in to help her?
So yes, that's another key ingredient to the tamal process is you need hands, right? You need hands to spread that masa onto the husks, to make sure that the meat is ready and done, and put them all together. And she does, yeah. Sometimes I've helped maybe about twice because there's rules on helping. Some of us are not deemed worthy to help. And then I've had friends that show up to my house and they're more than welcome to help, which again is part of the rules, right? And I think everyone in their own families has kind of those rules. I was talking to my student and I said, join the live. And she said, Chef, my mom likes to clean the kitchen before we start steaming the tamales. That's her like rule. The kitchen has to be clean. Si no, no salen buenos los tamales. And I was like, okay, right? Yeah. But that's the key ingredient. Someone said, my grandma puts a penny on the bottom of the pot because that's how she knows if the water is getting low. The penny starts rattling.
I see.
And I'm like, oh, that's a good trick, right?
A good trick, yeah.
So,
well, we have a tamalada every year in my wife's family. And when my mother was alive, and when I was a kid growing up, my mother would bring people together to participate in the making of the tamales. So at embarrando la masa, I remember doing that from the time I was a kid, and to this day. Yeah. And so it's always a different kind of fun. We have fun.
Yeah.
But then when you're making tamales, that's different fun. Yeah. Because it has different meaning. Yeah. Have you sampled what your students say about the process of making tamales and the kind of fulfillment that they get out of it?
What do you mean sample?
Like, can you, a story here, a story there, that sort of thing, and then kind of taking it in to understand the different experiences people have.
Yes, that's probably my favorite part of the job is having to, like, for example, a student of mine's Puerto Rican, and she lives here in the valley, and I asked her, what are you going to do for Thanksgiving? And she goes, oh, chef, my mom's got a turkey, and we're gonna put mojo around it, and we're gonna stuff it with mofongo. And I'm like, oh my God, that sounds delicious. I'm like, wait, like, do you have a recipe? And she was like, well, she kind of like has a video that she made. And I was like, can you send me that video? And she did. She sent me the video, and that the mom doused the turkey in ajo. And I was like, why have I not ever thought of doing my turkey like a la pernil, right? Because it injects beautiful like garlic flavor in there, and then plantains as the stuffing. So cool, right? And again, she's learning how to cook these dishes, but in her own house there's a culinary artist, right? So I think that's really fun. The fun part of my job is that everybody brings their own stories and takes and traditions to their rituals.
Yeah, there seems to be also this strand with you about how you I think you democratize this kind of power with food production, food consumption. It's not like the one sabio. Todos son sabios.
Yes.
Yeah. Where does that come from?
Probably from not being invited to a lot of tables. Yeah. When I went from cooking at home and cooking professionally, there was a very big dynamic of who was deemed the sabios, right? And it was a lot of French men, French white men that were the ones that got the accolades, the ones that, got the investors to do the restaurant concepts. But in my entire life, I was taught how to produce food and how to consume from women, why was I not seeing that, right? Even in the Middle Eastern kitchens, it was all men, all men. There was not one woman. I was the only woman that was allowed, and probably because I was not of the culture that they allowed my hand preparation, right? And so,
but you also push yourself in, no?
well, yes. I mean, yeah, I have to. Are you kidding? Like,
Right, that
I
kind
have
of seems
to.
like a good MO for you.
Yeah, yeah. And so because there was no invite, so I had to kind of, you know, say I want to do that too. And so I think that the reason why I make sure to give credibility all around is because it deserves it, right? It's not just me saying like, oh no, we can all kumbaya. No, it's I learned these techniques. The toughest executive chef I've worked for is my mother, because at 6 years old she was like, pica la cebolla chiquito, and I was like, like I don't know how, right? It wasn't like, oh, mijo's with me in the kitchen, right? It wasn't like, oh, come on and partake. It was, you need to do it right. And so I think it's important to note that in my profession now.
What do you see as some of the basic gender differences in the industry? How do men go about their work? How do women go about their work?
Well, I mean, let's look at it in our own cooking homes, right? Who does the indoor cooking? The tias, the moms, the grandmas. Who does the outdoor cooking? The tios, the uncles, right? The grilling, right? So, and my thesis in college was very much on this, on the kitchen as a gendered space. But with a twist, what happens when there's two genders? How do you decide that power dynamic, right? I said we get takeout. That's simple. Uber Eats. No, I'm just kidding. And so, yeah, I think there's a difference from those two spaces where, you know, it's fun for you to partake in the tamalada, right? Mm-hmm. It's as Dr. Guajardo, you're having fun there, but your wife has a different responsibility to upkeep the tradition and make sure that everybody is having fun, right? And so I think specifically around holiday food, we have those rules that sometimes may leave people that really want to uphold the tradition out, right? So I think it's important that we make sure that we're all on the same agency to say, you know what, I want to make vegan tamales this year. It's like, oh, okay, well, you go in the corner so you don't cross-contaminate, pero aquí te quedas, right? And you don't shun anybody out, yeah.
What do you prepare for the holidays?
Yes, controversial topic.
Why is this controversial?
Because I consume on the holidays. I'm like, who's going to invite me over? I'll tell you so for Thanksgiving, I love to go camping. And I realized why I like to go camping. So this trip, we went to Gardner State Park. And there are so many Indian families out there, so many Korean families out there. And I'm like, why? Is there a festival going on at Gardner State Park? And it's because they have their own tradition, right? So, of course, there's all this smells and foods and, like, hot pots with tents. So amazing. And, one, the holidays are stressful. Food makes it a little bit better. And so this holiday season, I'll be making a lot of buñuelos with my students. We're doing a deep dive on buñuelos. We're going to make all different types of buñuelos for an event and try to learn a little bit more history and document some different recipes. Because, of course, the minute I say, we're going to make buñuelos, everyone's like, I have a recipe. My grandma's. So everyone's going to bring their own. And we're going to have, an homage to the buñuelo. Because I think it's so cool. It's so Valley specific, I think, too. because the buñuelos in Mexico are different. They're the 3D ones. But the ones here, right, are that tortilla, that crispy tortilla that's deep fried, and just kind of snacked on. And you always find yourself snacking on a buñuelo. They're in the house.
You have an event, you said? There's like you're gonna sell buñuelos?
No, we're
as a
gonna
fundraiser?
we're gonna contribute as for an art show opening. Our culinary students are gonna contribute buñuelos to an art display, right? 'Cause culinary arts.
Yeah.
So
That's good.
that's gonna be our showcase. Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. So, what's the one issue that we haven't talked about in terms of holiday food that you think we should be talking about?
Ooh. That's a very good question. Probably the difficulties of these traditions going away. Yeah.
Are they vulnerable traditions?
Well, I think as families decrease in size, or there's movement, whether it's migration or whether it's relocation, these rituals are not happening. So what's happening is other people are capitalizing on these rituals. For example, even though I love HEB, please sponsor me. HEB has a wonderful product out now that's a buñuelo ice cream. Isn't that so cool? Isn't that so cool? The modernization of the evolution of as a young kid, I would have killed for buñuelo ice cream. I wish I could have invented buñuelo ice cream, right?
HEB did?
HEB did it. They did it. They made it. But that's where we're seeing the trend, right? And yeah, I would like for it to maybe not be so family oriented, but community oriented, right? Where there's a buñuelada instead of a tamalada. And where there's a ponche making, workshop, that doesn't maybe involve alcohol, but just makes different types of ponches, or, where there's a gluten-free tamal class, where because these rituals only happen in the family sphere, sometimes that gets lost because there's no more reuniting of families, or the families are just not getting together as they used to, right? It's not as important. But if, again, a recipe can change, then the way we come together can also change. And maybe we need to have it more available for the public to partake in, not have the stressors of, pues my tío, I really don't want to talk to my tío about my identity, so I'm not going to go to the family gathering, right? Or I really don't want to talk about how we're not having kids or whatever, right? So we're not partaking in ritual. So I think that's the issue, that when we talk about holiday food is the conversations that happen while we're either making food or, consuming it.
When you teach, what is the role of the conversation around the meal? Is part of the teaching? Is there like conversation as a learning objective?
I no. No, it should be. I think that's real specific to, it is when you're curating a concept. So when you take an upper level class, you have to create the concept of, okay, what is it that you want on your menu? When you invite people in, what is it that you want them to feel in your environment? What is the identity of the restaurant? What is the identity of the space? That could be translated down to the table, right? The no topics, the yes topics, the how to accommodate dietary restrictions topics. Yeah. We touch on it briefly, but
yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating thing. There's in Curb Your Enthusiasm, there's one episode where Larry David talks about the middler, the person in the middle who facilitates the conversation. It's like absolutely essential. So you can't just have anybody in the middle. You need to have somebody who's got the skills. And so there's the food production, there's the eating of the food and all that, but then there's the conversation. And if the conversation is not like well stewarded, you can have a bad meal.
You can have a bad meal, or you can, not want to be slapping tamales, masa tamales, like you're like, no, ya tía, cálmala, right? Yeah. So, I agree.
So the one thing that we haven't talked about as much is is what the sustainability of the culture, or the dynamic quality of the culture, that you said maybe this is what we haven't talked about as much, which seems to me like such an important thing, but then again, culture is dynamic. So culture is going to grow in this way. So one might call it vulnerability, but no, maybe it's just the way it evolves. Like you talk about having fewer children, or young people not marrying, which is a real thing.
Right.
Now is that because of economy, or is that because just of, whatever it is, it's the reality. So what does that how does that impact the tamales or the buñuelos,
Right.
or the holiday foods? And you're saying that we'll figure it out.
Yeah, well, buñuelo ice cream is a perfect example of where it's going, right?
Because while we're not doing it,
Tamale-
somebody else will.
Tamale drive-through is year-round. I don't need my mom's tamales anymore. I have any tamal shop in town that will have it for 24/7, right? Any kind, chicken, pork. So, it's the ritual, isn't the recipe can always change. The product will always change, but it's the ritual that we need to figure out how to create more inviting spaces to the ritual.
Can you speak to issues of health?
Yeah, that's another. Yeah.
Issues of obesity, diabetes, and what that has to do with our foods.
Yeah, I mean, and again, we get in trouble when it's gotta be authentic, right? When it's gotta be authentic, and we get in trouble when we're rigid in our preservation of food specifically. Every Sunday we ate meat in our house. Why? Well, my parents felt that we are middle class, so we eat meat on Sundays. Okay, that has nothing to do with nutrition, right? That's just trying to be inclusive in society. So maybe meatless Mondays to combat that? No, we don't do that vegan stuff. Okay, but our ancestors were all puro papita, frijolito, right? No, but that's poor people stuff. Like, oh, but what? So we get in trouble when we are rigid about our consumption, that we sometimes make ourselves sick, right? Like by having to consume the way it's been consumed, when you can easily substitute, coconut oil into your tamales, a different masa's gluten-free, so there's no issue there. But if you want to have less meat, right? I don't want to do pork. I'm watching the cholesterol. Let's go ahead and add some jackfruit in there, or some tofu, or whatever. And so then we become the authentic police. And esos no son tamales. And that's when we lose out, right?
What are the next 30 years like for Nadia Casaperalta?
Ooh.
What's the vision?
I don't know. One day at a time. The vision is to the vision is to try to consume a lot more from the regions that I exist in, right? I went to the farmers market. I like to go to the farmers market and visit the farmers, see what they got, you know. We have conversations all the time about why we don't use, for example, like, you know, we grow beautiful Swiss chard here in the Valle, and we don't use it. It gets sold up north. You know, some of us do use it in our homes if you visit the market. And I told one of the farmers how easy it could be to replace the tamal instead of using it as tamal veracruzano. Instead of using the banana leaf, we could just wrap it in Swiss chard leaves and have a completely edible product. She was like, do it. And I'm like, no, I just mean as a society, right? Like, how cool would it be to change one thing that could be more sustainable, healthier, and then capitalize on the stuff that's growing? How cool would that be? I think I would want to be part of that growth of not reinventing, not redefining, but just understanding of how to replace when it's begging for the change, right? These beautiful leaves just grow. You know, they're demanding that you put some masa in there and wrap them up. Yeah.
I once heard you say that part of your also, you know, what you're looking at in the future is to populate the food industry with high-skilled people, educated people, and it's one of the, you know, sources that pushes you to be an educator and a good culinary arts instructor. Is that an issue in South Texas that we don't necessarily have a lot of, you know, trained professionals, or am I speaking out of turn here?
I would say trained is one of those terms that are like self-taught. You know, a lot of people grow up with food in their homes, in you know, if there's no food scarcity. And so, yeah, I think we tend to outsource. Like, oh, we go to Austin to eat good food. We go to San Antonio to eat, you know, quality food. But they come here to eat tacos. They come here to eat, right? And so it's not a conversation of I'm gonna create the talent. No, I'm gonna nurture the talent into, you know, previous to the student that was like, oh, I have mofongo. I'm like, that student could be the next Puerto Rican, RGV influenced Puerto Rican chef. I don't know that. They may also just cook at their home and have a delicious meal at home, right? And it's not so much pressure as into building talent, but to nurture these foodies, food culinarians. Not everybody wants to be a chef, but I do want to keep the tradition of cooking in your home. Definitely want to nurture that, right? Whether you take that into your business sector, that's great, and I will facilitate that as a mentor as well. But as long as you stay cooking, that's a win.
So many years ago, your mother picked South Texas as her destination. And so there's a clear answer for why you would pick South Texas because of that. But there's got to be other reasons why you have picked South Texas as a place from which to grow.
Yeah, I love the vulnerability here. It's our gente. Gente are so beautiful, very kind, and also just I think the geography, right? Like the fields, driving through fields, seeing food grow, food that we don't eat grow here, right? I think that's what keeps me growing here is seeing the growth of the community. Yeah.
I love the vulnerability of the gente you said. I'm gonna chew on that for a while.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, I think.
Yeah. Well, and you know, one easy way to get people to talk vulnerably is ask them about their favorite food and why. And it's that language that I'm really lucky to be able to speak because it happens in any culture. And then it's my favorite language to speak anywhere. You know, if I'm talking to someone who's from Nigeria and I'm like, oh, what's your favorite fish curry? And they're like, how do you know about fish curry? I'm like, well, yeah. Or like if I go to a Puerto Rican community and I'm like, who does the best pernil here? And they're like, oh my God, right? It's the best. I mean, I can do no wrong if I speak the language of food of a person.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nadia, you've been delightful. You always are. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else you want to say?
No, let's
before we-
get to the comments. I'm excited.
Oh, wow. Okay.
What
So
did we
somebody
trigger?
says, Ociel Uribe, yep, that was me. He says, don't underestimate my weight. I'm a big eater, especially around Christmas. So somebody said that here. Social dynamics exist. So it's the guy who greeted you up front.
Oh, hey.
Yeah. Social dynamics exist around food because it is culture. Food is culture. Tofu tamales. Somebody's like incredulous about that.
See, I love it.
I
yeah.
wish I could learn from you, says Angela. Lived in the Valley over 20 years and can't make any regional holiday items. Trying to teach myself via the internet.
See, that's what I'm saying. We gotta host these buñueladas where everybody's invited.
Somebody said, Luna said, food anthropologists are the best anthropologists.
Ah, yes.
Ricardo said, I'm getting hungry just listening to the plática. More like a pozole craving. Oh, Ociel said it was Dos and Ricardo, not me.
Okay.
Who greeted you.
Ricardo.
But it is my favorite subject as well, he said. Okay. That's great. Yeah, so I think people were very engaged in this. Bravo, my love, says Rose Angela. Inspirational. Tofu tamales. Yeah, that's great. All right. Nadia, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
That was
And I hope
fun.
everybody has a delicious holiday.
And with that, we will close our November 2023 Museum Pláticas. And so we look forward to seeing you in December for our next edition of the Museum of South Texas History's Museum Pláticas. Happy holidays to everybody.